Dubrow Suspicion Files.
It's a number that it just defies comprehension, especially when you understand the scope of the violence that followed.
Right.
4 lives, an entire family, extinguished for the equivalent of, what, $40 to $50?
Yeah.
An amount that, even in 1959, seems, well, it's just ridiculously trivial.
It is the ultimate absurdity, but if we focus only on the financial cost, I think we miss the real story here.
Okay.
We are not just exploring a true crime. We are studying the moral economy of storytelling. This is the tragedy of a great American writer, Truman Capote, who took that execution and transformed it
Into something new.
exactly into the foundation of a new literary form and the devastating price he paid for his masterpiece.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This is a huge historical and ethical knot. Our deep dive today is into the 1959 Clutter family murders in Holcomb, Kansas.
And of course, the creation, the legacy, and the ultimate personal compromise of Capote's groundbreaking nonfiction novel, In Cold Blood.
We are beginning this journey at the precise moment before the violence. Let's set the clock back to Saturday, November 14th, 1959.
And that setting is arguably the most important character in this first act. You really cannot grasp the scale of the shockwave without understanding the profound, almost unimaginable serenity that defined Holcomb before that day.
Absolutely. When Capote arrived there, he called Holcomb a haphazard hamlet. This is high plains country, situated in western Kansas, about 70 miles shy of the Colorado border.
Yeah.
It's geographically defined by its vastness, its flatness, and what feels like an endless sea of wheat.
It's a landscape that really enforces isolation. The environment itself is so quiet, punctuated only by sounds that carry for miles.
Like what?
Well, the sources describe the unnerving, keening hysteria of coyotes at night and the lonely, long wail of locomotive whistles.
Right, which are signals of connection, but also of the world just passing by, never stopping. And the human element matches that isolation. In 1959, the population was only 270 people.
Tiny.
And what we read in the sources is this crucial foundational detail. It was a place of total, absolute, unconditional trust.
Mm-hmm.
People there didn't just forget to lock their doors sometimes. They never locked their doors. Ever.
It's the physical manifestation of the American heartland's small-town serenity. It's an ideal, right? A promise of safety rooted in community knowledge and moral certainty.
And when that trust is betrayed.
The damage isn't just physical, it's existential. This crime didn't just kill 4 members of the Clutter family, it permanently ended the sense of safety in a town, and you could argue, symbolically, in a nation.
So let's bring this family to life.
Mm.
If we focus on the mundane texture of their last normal Saturday, the horror of the subsequent interruption becomes exponentially greater.
It does.
They were the very definition of the respected, prosperous, all-American family.
And Capote, who was just a consummate stylist, he knew that. To build the necessary narrative tension, he had to immerse you, the reader, in the small, beautiful details of what was about to be just obliterated.
That's where he starts to deploy the techniques of fiction inside his nonfiction.
Precisely.
So let's start with the head of the house, Herb Clutter, age 48.
Okay.
He was more than just a successful farmer. He was a pillar of the community, known for his ethical rigidity and his success in business.
A devout Methodist, too. He was famously opposed to alcohol and tobacco.
And crucially, the sources emphasize he was known for never carrying cash. He begins this Saturday, just like any other, focused on the business of running his prosperous farm.
And then there is Bonnie Clutter, age 45. The sources paint this really sad picture of a gentlewoman who struggled deeply.
Yeah.
She had suffered for years from what was clinically referred to as depression, alongside various physical ailments.
And you have to remember, in 1959 Kansas, discussing mental health was highly stigmatized. That often made her isolation even more profound.
It did. And yet, on this Saturday afternoon, she's engaged in this moment of quiet, delicate interaction. It's like a small piece of therapy for her.
What's she doing?
She is showing her beloved collection of tiny miniatures to the neighbor girl, Jolene Katz. It's this miniature world of domesticity that is literally hours away from being shattered.
So tragic. Meanwhile, 15-year-old Kenyon Clutter, a high school sophomore, is down in the basement.
Right, he's in the playroom, completely absorbed in a carpentry project. The sound of his hammer and saw, the smell of fresh wood. It's the absolute epitome of a focused, innocent teenage afternoon.
And at the center of all this household energy is Nancy Clutter. 16 years old.
Ah, Nancy.
She is repeatedly described as the vibrant, beating heart of that house. She's active, she's popular, her day is packed with neighborly engagement.
And what is she doing? She's baking. She is teaching that same neighbor girl, Jolene Katz, how to bake a cherry pie.
Oh, wow.
That activity, the smell, the heat, the shared domestic purpose, it becomes the defining symbol of the innocence that the killers were approaching. It's the last sensory evidence of their normal lives.
She's also navigating classic, low-stakes teenage drama. She's on the phone with her best friend, Susan Kidwell, talking about her boyfriend, Bobby Rupp.
Right.
And dealing with her father's very traditional Midwestern constraint herb, wanted them to slow down and not get too serious too quickly.
And Capote collected these specific sensory details, the smell of that cherry pie, the gentle clinking of Bonnie's miniatures, the sound of the phone call, the teenage gossip, precisely because they allow the reader to fully inhabit the victims.
They aren't just statistics.
Exactly. When the ensuing violence arrives, it feels less like a detached crime and more like a profound, senseless interruption of something fragile and beautiful.
That attention to detail is truly devastating. It elevates the reporting into art. But here's where the narrative shifts. While Nancy is wrapping up her perfect, normal Saturday, 400 miles away, the dark shadow is already moving toward Holcomb.
Yeah, we shift perspective completely. We find Perry Smith already in severe physical pain.
From the motorcycle
A
accident.
motorcycle accident years earlier. He's constantly chewing aspirin, trying to dull the chronic, agonizing pain from his shattered leg. Pain, both physical and psychological, is his constant shadow.
And his partner, 𝐃𝐿 arrives. They're tuning up a black Chevrolet, preparing it for a high-speed 400-mile run across the state of Kansas.
And they're heading straight for that small-town serenity with a clear, specific, yet totally misguided expectation of a huge financial score.
So the moment of rupture happens the following day, Sunday, November 15th, 1959.
The Clutter family misses church.
Which is immediately noticed. It's a huge red flag in that community. Nancy's friends, Susan Kidwell, and Nancy's boyfriend, Bobby Rupp, they go to check on the house, finding the door bizarrely open.
And what they found was, it was just beyond the scope of imagination for that community.
The scene they stumbled upon, as detailed by the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the KBI, was characterized not by random chaos, which is what often accompanies a robbery,
Oh, not at all.
but by a terrifying cold efficiency. It was clinical, yet it was undeniably a slaughterhouse.
Let's break down the crime scene as the investigators found it. Upstairs, Nancy and her mother, Bonnie, were discovered. Both had been bound tightly with cord.
And both were shot in the head at close range.
Down in the basement, Kenyon was found on a couch in the playroom, the same room where he had been working on his carpentry just the day before.
Also bound, gagged, and shot in the head.
But the patriarch, 𝐃𝐿, suffered the worst. He was discovered in the furnace room, his hands were bound, his mouth was taped shut, and he had been subjected to this redundant brutality.
What do you mean?
He was first stabbed, then his throat was slashed, and finally he was shot in the head. The sheer overkill suggests a level of rage or pre-planned cruelty that far exceeds a simple robbery gone awry.
The reaction from law enforcement was telling. Logan Sanford, the KBI director, was quoted saying this was the goriest crime I have ever seen in Kansas.
Right.
But wait, if the execution was clinical and pre-planned, why the description goriest? Doesn't that suggest chaos and emotional overkill?
That's the key contradiction Capote seized upon. It was a clinical execution in terms of its purpose, to eliminate witnesses, but the method used on 𝐃𝐿 was intensely personal and brutal.
So it implies the killers lost control.
Or that one of them did. The brutality mixed with the efficiency, that's the psychological terror of it.
And the motive. This was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. They did ransack the house, searching for what they believed was a hidden safe.
Right.
But their actual haul was pathetic.
Kenyon's small transistor radio, a pair of binoculars, and less than $50, maybe $40.
The trivial nature of the motive was the bomb that exploded in Holcomb.
Because this wasn't a death caused by a domestic squabble or a business rivalry, it was random violence for nothing. And that randomness, the realization that you could be executed for a few dollars, was terrifying.
The immediate community reaction was just catastrophic. The sources noted that neighborliness evaporated.
Right. People who had lived side by side for generations suddenly looked at each other with suspicion. A dark cloud of suspicion fell over Holcomb.
Trust had been the social currency of that town, and now it was bankrupt.
Everyone became a suspect, particularly the locals who knew the layout of the Clutter farm and knew that Herb never kept cash. The community was internally paralyzed by fear and doubt.
And that paralyzing contradiction, a professional-level execution for a pittance in the quietest place imaginable, that's what traveled.
It did. On November 16, 1959, the day after the discovery, a tiny 300-word article was published deep inside the New York Times. The headline, "Wealthy Farmer, 3 of Family Slain."
And this is the true turning point in the Capote narrative.
It is. He's sitting in his apartment in Brooklyn, already a literary superstar, but searching for the magnum opus, the work that will define him. He reads that small piece, and he instantly sees the profound narrative potential.
What did he see specifically?
He saw the end of an American ideal. He saw the meaningless end of American small-town serenity. He didn't just see a crime, he saw the structure of an epic nonfiction novel, a new form of storytelling that captured the modern fear of random violence.
What's so interesting is that the story was not a huge national sensation yet.
Not at all. Capote's genius was in recognizing its inherent narrative power before the rest of the country did. He grasped that the lack of motive was the most terrifying motive of all.
He knew he had to be there.
He had to be.
So he secures the assignment from the New Yorker and he flies to Kansas. But he immediately runs into a massive social obstacle.
Oh, yeah.
Truman Capote was famously diminutive, highly eccentric, and possessed of what was called great flamboyance.
So in reserved, grieving Holcomb, he was an alien figure. The local people, already suspicious of everyone, found this tiny, high-pitched man from New York City completely suspicious. He was an outsider in every conceivable way.
And this is where his childhood friend, Nell Harper Lee, becomes utterly indispensable.
Absolutely key.
At this time, her own masterpiece, To Kill a Mockingbird, was still months away from publication. But her character, her genuine, low-key Midwestern demeanor, was exactly the antidote Capote needed.
She was the cultural translator. Where Capote would repel the locals with his exoticism, Harper Lee provided low-key friendliness and immediate authenticity. She didn't seek attention, she sought connection.
She was the one who could speak to the grieving townspeople, the law enforcement, and the neighbors, and make them trust her.
She literally cleared a path for him. Without Harper Lee's ability to establish rapport and vouch for Capote, the town would have shut him out entirely. She gained the access.
Yeah, Capote provided the narrative voice.
It's safe to say, In Cold Blood would simply not exist without her invisible labor.
So while Capote is slowly embedding himself, the investigation, led by Agent Alvin Dewey of the KBI, is under immense, crushing pressure. They are absolutely at a wall.
They had mobilized every resource they had, conducting hundreds of interviews. But let's contextualize KBI in 1959.
Right.
They weren't dealing with modern forensics. Fingerprinting and ballistics were rudimentary, and they lacked any kind of comprehensive national database to track transients or repeat offenders easily.
So they were relying heavily on shoe leather and intuition.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the absence of a logical motive forces them to conclude that the killer must be a local, someone the Clutters knew.
Which just keeps that dark cloud hanging over Holcomb. And it's terrifying Dewey, who is personally vested in solving this crime.
The investigation was essentially stalled by its own logic. They couldn't imagine that 4 people would be brutally executed by 2 strangers passing through based on a ridiculous rumor. They searched for a local grudge, a local inheritance issue, a local enemy.
And the solution arrives not through a forensic breakthrough in Holcomb, but weeks later, hundreds of miles away, inside the Kansas State Penitentiary.
This is where we meet the prisoner who accidentally set the entire tragedy in motion, Floyd Wells.
Right.
Wells, lying in his cell, hears the news on the radio. He recognizes the name Clutter and is struck by absolute terror.
Because he realizes he is indirectly responsible for 4 murders. And he realizes he knows the men who did it.
He does. Let's dissect this prison fiction. Wells had worked for Herb Clutter years earlier. In the casual, often boastful environment of a prison cell, he had inflated his knowledge to impress his new cellmate, Dick Hickok.
And the lie was devastatingly precise.
It was. Wells claimed Herb Clutter kept a large safe in his private office that contained a guaranteed $10,000 in cash.
And the reality?
There was no safe. There was no $10,000. And Herb Clutter, the ethical, successful man, disliked cash and conducted all his business by check.
So 4 people died for a complete, boastful, fictional fabrication told years before in a prison cell.
It's an almost biblical tragedy rooted in human vanity and greed.
And Wells recounted Hickok's immediate predatory reaction to the rumor.
Yeah, Dick promised, as soon as I get out, I'm going to. See if there's still $10,000 in their damn safe. The victims were targets only because of a ghost, a fantasy of wealth that never materialized.
Wells finally comes forward, motivated by a mix of genuine terror knowing he was responsible and the promise of ransom money.
And he ratted out the murders, providing Agent Dewey with the names, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith. This provides the KBI with the first real, actionable lead, and the entire investigation immediately shifts focus to tracking these two drifters.
So we now have the names of the killers.
Yeah.
But as Capote discovered, they weren't typical criminal masterminds. They were small-time hoods, yet a terrifyingly complex and complementary pair.
Their psychological profiles are they're central to the whole story. Let's look at Richard Dick Hickok, age 28. He was the operational planner. On the surface, he was the classic all-American boy. Came from a good family, intelligent, a good athlete. He even had a scholarship offer before a major car accident.
But beneath that veneer, he was a purely manipulative sociopath. The sources define him as smooth talker, fundamentally 100% remorseless.
Right. He was later diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. The physical damage from a 1950 car accident left his face slightly lopsided, a small external mirror to the internal distortion.
So Dick was the brains.
But the coward. He dreamed big but lacked the genuine criminal nerve. He needed a partner to carry out the act.
And that partner was Perry Smith, age 31.
Perry. He was the muscle, but his internal landscape was profoundly different. He is described as childlike, sensitive, artistic, a thwarted poet.
He was half Cherokee, and his entire life was just a succession of devastating traumas that fed his immense, suppressed rage.
Perry's background is heartbreaking. His mother was a severe alcoholic who eventually died choking on her own vomit. After her death, he was bounced around, eventually sent to a Catholic orphanage,
where he claimed the nuns severely abused him, specifically for being a chronic bedwetter, humiliating him and causing deep, lasting shame.
And the violence didn't stop there. He was physically shattered by a 1952 motorcycle accident that left his legs permanently damaged,
resulting in chronic pain and a crippling addiction to aspirin.
So he carried both an inner artistic sensitivity, he drew, he yearned for education, and a constant explosive rage rooted in lifelong physical and psychological pain.
So you have the remorseless manipulator who needs a killer, partnered with the broken, sensitive artist who is capable of immense violence due to his inner turmoil.
A truly destructive combination.
The KBI finally tracks them down. Dick and Perry had fled down to Mexico, living hand-to-mouth by passing bad checks, then returned to the States.
And 6 weeks after the murders, on December 30th, 1959, they are finally spotted by a patrolman and arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada, still driving a stolen car.
This is the moment the external hunt ends, and the psychological deep dive begins.
It is. The interrogation is fascinating. Dick, the smooth talker, immediately denies killing anyone, sticking to his sociopathic instinct to deflect blame entirely onto Perry.
But Perry breaks.
He does. Under interrogation, he gives Agent Dewey the full, devastating confession. He admits to the details, cutting Herb Kletter's throat and shooting both Herb and Kenyon.
And while the question of who shot the women remained confusing and contradictory in their stories, Perry ultimately takes full responsibility for all 4 deaths.
He does. And this is where Capote finally finds the narrative engine for his book. He meets the killers and immediately becomes intensely obsessed with Perry Smith.
This meeting is the foundational, most crucial relationship in the entire story.
This is the moment of literary synchronicity. The comparison between Truman Capote, born Truman persons, and Perry Smith is uncanny and heartbreaking.
Capote, like Perry, was short, sensitive, and an artistic outsider. Capote's trauma was rooted in maternal abandonment.
Right. His glamorous socialite mother was often absent and ashamed of her effeminate son, eventually shipping him off to live with distant relatives in Alabama.
And Perry, too, was abandoned. He was also short, sensitive, and an artistic outsider, but funneled instead into the brutal system of abusive orphanages.
Both men were defined by displacement and neglect in early life.
Biographers have referred to them as opposite twins.
And Capote saw in Perry Smith the road not taken. Perry represented the darkness, the rage, the failure that Capote had spent his entire life running from, the version of Truman persons who didn't find fame and art, but violence and death.
And Capote uses this shared psychological DNA. He forms an intense, highly destructive bond with Perry over the next 6 years, writing thousands of letters and making countless visits to the prison.
He uses his charm, his empathy, and their shared trauma to elicit the full story, the horror, the lack of motive, the deep context. Perry gives Capote the soul of the book.
It's an act of profound storytelling, but also profound manipulation. Capote charms his subject, makes him trust him, and gets the greatest story of the century. But the price of that bond is about to become visible.
It is.
The trial moves quickly, what the sources called a fast-track prosecution. The evidence, Perry's detailed confession, is overwhelming.
It is. On March 29, 1960, an all-male jury finds them guilty and sentences them to death by hanging.
They are remanded to death row at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing. And then begins the agonizing 5-year legal and moral battle that is the real core of Capote's struggle.
This 5-year wait, the struggle through the appeals process, which went to the Supreme Court twice, is the central ethical problem of the entire enterprise. It is the period where Capote's moral compass starts to break down.
By this time, Capote has 8,000 pages of notes. He has the narrative, the perfect opening scene of the cherry pie, the detailed profiles of the victims, the shocking twist of the cellmate's lie, the intimate confession of the killer.
He has everything a masterpiece needs except the final essential ending.
His self-proclaimed nonfiction novel cannot be published until the final consequence is delivered. The story demands justice, demands the closure of the execution.
And this is the profound moral horror. Capote had nurtured a sincere, emotional bond with Perry. Perry viewed Capote as his only true friend, his intellectual equal, his only avenue to be truly understood.
Yet Capote was simultaneously serving as the literary collaborator of the state, silently willing the appeals process to fail. He needed their deaths for his book to be born.
When you look at the quotes from this period, Capote is in agony. He loved Perry, or at least the idea of Perry, the mirrored self. But he knew that if Perry lived, the book would be incomplete. A brilliant piece of journalism, perhaps, but not the epic novel he needed it to be.
The story required the execution.
The delay wasn't just stressful, it was financially and emotionally crippling. Every postponement meant he couldn't publish, couldn't reap the rewards of 6 years of intense psychological work. Capote himself became, in a sense, imprisoned by the narrative structure he had chosen.
So the title, In Cold Blood, famously stops being solely about the killer's actions on that night in Holcomb.
And it starts applying to the writer's methodology. Capote became a cold-blooded observer, waiting for the final curtain call, regardless of the fate of the man he claimed to love.
That 5-year duration essentially turned Capote's life into a narrative hell. He wasn't just reporting, he was participating in a waiting game for his friend's demise, leveraging that intimate relationship to maximize the narrative impact of the ultimate tragedy.
Right.
The appeals finally run out. The date is set, April 14th, 1965. Capote, recognizing the intense emotional volatility of the situation, claimed the emotional buildup would be too much for a final personal visit.
But he does attend the execution as an official witness in the prison warehouse. He is there to see his ending.
The differences in their demeanor on the gallows are the final testament to their psychological makeup. 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏 is first.
He's relatively casual, declined his last meal, and even shakes hands with the KBI agents, including Agent Alvin Dewey, who had suffered so much to catch him.
And his final words are dismissive, devoid of true empathy or deep reflection. I just want to say, I hold no hard feelings. Goodbye.
Pronounced dead at 12:41 a.m., he died the way he lived, manipulating the social situation.
Then came Perry Smith.
Perry's last meal request was specific and almost extravagant. Spiced shrimp, French fries, garlic bread, ice cream, and strawberries with whipped cream.
And as he's led to the gallows, he makes a small gesture. He winks mischievously at Agent Dewey.
But his final words carry true weight and reflection, combining his own tragedy with philosophical insight, I think. Capital punishment is legally and morally wrong. I'm sorry.
He was pronounced dead at 1:19 a.m.
And Capote watched both hangings. He got the final, visceral, and painful ending he needed, and the immediate reaction confirms the destructive power of that choice.
He was described as inconsolable, weeping uncontrollably on the plane back to New York.
He had secured the story, but he had simultaneously witnessed the death of his mirror image and arguably his own moral soul.
The result was an immediate, overwhelming success. In Cold Blood was serialized in The New Yorker in 1965 and published as a book in 1966.
It was an instant global sensation. It fundamentally changed literature. It cemented Capote as the most famous writer in America.
He earned massive amounts of money, the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars in today's economy.
He had not only perfected, but essentially invented the true crime genre as a serious literary undertaking.
The world saw the professional, dazzling ending. But the story, as we now know, has a second internal ending. The one Capote lived. He achieved his life's ambition, and the sources are definitive. It destroyed him.
He was creatively crippled by the experience. He never finished another book of that scope or literary merit. The psychological toll of his betrayal of Perry, the years spent waiting for death, left him fundamentally blocked and haunted.
A friend famously summarized the tragedy. Something in Truman had died with Perry.
He had poured his dark energy, his trauma, and his empathy into that one project, and when the subject was gone, his capacity to create was extinguished.
His life descended into total, chaotic self-destruction. He abandoned serious writing for the constant blinding distraction of high society. Nightlife Studio 54 became his sanctuary.
And he was constantly fueled by a cocktail of cocaine, prescription pills, and Stoli vodka.
His final, desperate creative act was a total betrayal of his new community. He published a chapter of his promised new masterpiece, Answered Prayers, which was supposed to be a grand novel about high society.
Instead, the chapter exposed the dark, vicious secrets, the affairs, the scandals, and the emotional cruelties of his wealthy, high society friends.
That betrayal was total and immediate. They immediately exiled him. He was blackballed from the social circles that had been his support system and his inspiration.
He lost his community, his income stream, his social identity, and tragically, his remaining grip on reality.
Truman Capote died on August 25, 1984, at the age of 59.
The official coroner's report provides the final, bleak summation of his long, destructive decline. Liver disease complicated by phlebitis and multiple drug intoxication.
So he traded 4 victims' tragedy for artistic immortality, changing the course of American literature.
But the price was his own physical health, his psychological peace, and his ability to continue creating. The book that made him ruthlessly and completely unmade him, cementing him as the final tragic victim of that senseless day in Holcomb, Kansas.
This deep dive has allowed us to synthesize the layers of the cluttered tragedy. The shocking shift from heartland innocence to paralyzing fear, the absolute absurdity of the initial motive, the lie of the $10,000 safe, and the intense psychological and ultimately destructive bond that Capote cultivated with Perry Smith.
What stands out is the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the creation of what we deem to be great foundational art requires a profound act of moral compromise from the artist. It transforms the creator into a cold-blooded consumer of human suffering.
So as you leave this discussion, we ask you to consider the ultimate moral trade-off. Capote achieved historical fame, immense fortune, and invented a genre. What he lost was his soul, his ability to write, and his life at 59 years old. Was the literary achievement worth the human cost to the writer himself?
And here's a question for you to mull over in the coming days. Given Capote's intense psychological connection to Perry Smith, seeing him as a clear mirror of his own potential failed self, the darkness he narrowly avoided, what does it truly mean that to secure his lasting success and fame, Capote essentially had to wait for the state to execute the darkest, most thwarted version of himself? What responsibility does an artist truly bear when the very completion of their work hinges on the irreversible loss of the person they claim to understand and perhaps even love? That is the haunting legacy of In Cold Blood.